Hans Niemann is like a magnet for strange and unexpected things. So this is a game he played today in a tournament in Spain. It's the Elllobregat Open, and I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. This is round 7, and he was off to a flyer in this tournament, winning his first 4 games. Then he drew 2, and so he was looking to carry on that good form in today's game. Now his opponent was this guy, Jing Yao Tin. I've not heard of him before. 2050 60 GM, so Hans expected to win, especially if he wants to stay in the 2700 club, which he's broken in this tournament on the live ratings list. So let's see what happened here. He kicked off with c4, we had c6, and after d4, we're now into a Queen's Gambit declined, but the Slav variation with the pawn on c6. So the knight comes to f3, knight f6, and now Hans doesn't play the standard knight to c3 move, he plays e3 instead. Very respectable system. We see the bishop coming out to f5, now the knight comes to c3, and here we see black play pawn to e6, and then white goes after this bishop. Now just to show you, if black starts with pawn to h6 here to give this bishop a retreat square, now you can go like this if it gets chased. Well, then white can go queen to b3. And without going deep on the line, white gets a nice game here. You've got pressure on both of those points. And even after queen b6, you can get a nice structure with takes on d5. So the standard move here after knight c3 is pawn e6. Sets up that pawn triangle, but white can now go after that bishop pair. And we see that in the game. This has been seen many times before. So black now goes bishop to e4. This is the theoretical move, and it sets a small trap because you don't want to take this bishop with that knight, because then the pawn recaptures, and now this knight has no retreat square. So you have to go g3 to stop it getting trapped with g5, and this is just a little bit of an ugly pawn structure, Swiss cheese around the king. The knight's going to be kind of fumbling back, not ideal. So you don't take the bishop, the tried and tested move is f3, the bishop drops back, and now queen to b3 is the main move here, pressuring this pawn. You can go queen b6, but queen c7 is the main move. And now Hans goes bishop d2, he's just delaying the development of this bishop, seeing if black captures. Now we had bishop e7, and here we see Hans capturing on d5. There's a number of different moves from here. We've seen g3 played also. We've seen castle's queen side. Knight takes on g6 immediately. Lots of top level games. But Hans goes for this one. And black now recaptures with the knight. You can also go with the pawn, challenge the center a bit more, prepare to bring this knight, looks very natural. But okay, black does this one. Now when you do this kind of move, you do have to be careful that you don't run into e4, get steamrolled in the center. But black's okay here because white can't really dive this knight away and then play e4. So okay, the knight's going to chop itself off for this one in a moment. You're not getting blown off the board as black. So now Hans takes on g6. The h-pawn recaptures, good practice to always recapture towards the center, plus you open that rook. Now we see castle's queen side from Hans, and it's an aggressive move. That wasn't forced, by the way. You could have put the king on f2. It's another top computer move, but we see this one. Now the knight takes on c3, and the bishop recaptures. And it's a good moment to pause here, because white's picked up the bishop pair out of the opening, plus they've got better control in the center, e4's coming, so long term white's going to have the trumps. But in the short term, bang, pawn a5. We can now see what's going to happen. There's this attack coming on the queen side, which white has to weather the storm of. So the pawn's now coming down fast. a4 and then a3 is threatened, and you could let this pawn structure arise. Okay, Hans went a3, but say you go e4, well, you could get a structure like this. Now the computer says this is playable, but okay, now you've got some new problems around your king. What Hans went for instead was pawn a3 in this position here, so that he stops the pawn running all the way, but now b5, b4 is going to have something to nibble on. So b5 on the board. Now we see the bishop dropping back to d2, anticipating b4. Now a4 came, kicking the queen. Now you can drop it to c2 here. We see it landing on that square in a moment. Hans goes to c3 instead. Not much to choose between these two moves when you look at it with an engine. And this one now sets up a threat. There's a pin down the c file. The queen is unprotected. So if you castled, for example, well, then you're running into this tactic, winning a pawn, or you lose your queen. So we didn't have castles played. Instead, queen b6 jumps out of that threat. Now Hans goes king b1, comes off that open c file. I mean, the computer gives this as not its top accurate move, but okay, it looks logical. It wanted to start with h4, but we see that in a moment. So castles was played, and now pawn to h4. So knight a6 from black, logical developing move, preparing to support b4. Now we see queen c2, anticipating that threat, and now b4 comes anyway, and we see the bishop chopping itself off for that knight on a6. So Hans is forced here to give back those bishops because that knight is too much of a deadly attacker if he then took on b4 and allowed the knight to land on that square here. But after chopping the knight, well, now the bishop has to recapture, not quite so dangerous, and he gets a moment to push on with his own attack on the king side. So the bishop took on d2, clearing the b file for the queen. The rook recaptured, and now pawn a3, we can see black is so quick to the punch. This looks so scary here. So b3 was played to keep the lines closed, but a2 check. The king sidestepped, and it's a classic case of using the enemy pawn as a shield from the attack. But this is all very thin ice that Hans Niemann is skating on. So the rook came to a3, preparing to win a pawn. That one was defended, and now we see this pawn captured on h5. If you try and go rook b8 straight away to win this pawn, well, now white can take here and they're generating counterplay. If pawn recaptures, then queen c4 is a good move. You pressure this one, king f7 can defend, but then there's multiple moves for white to keep a balance here. One is lifting the rook, preparing to come like this. There's also some very brave moves like king b2. Okay, different game. But the point being, even if you bring the rook straight away, white can generate counterplay. So instead, black took on h5. The rook recaptured. Now this rook came to b8, but Hans is just in time to counterplay here against the weakened c-pawn. So rook c5 was played, and now we get this liquidation happening down here. Now, it looks like this thing's just headed towards a draw, right? So e4 was played. Now rook d3 comes behind the d-pawn. By the way, if you go check, you know, the king just picks up the pawn here. That's no good. So it comes here to pick up this pawn. Hans does this, black does this. And now he doesn't take this pawn here. You don't want to allow check, picking up this one. So instead we had the rook coming to c2, covering the second rank. g5, king takes. Now 3 on 3 on the king side should be a draw every day of a week at grandmaster level. Excuse me. Especially when you're someone who's trying to break that 2700 club. So the king's run in, we get these moves here. Rook a2 from Hans, preparing to activate, start giving some checks, hit the pawn. This rook goes, rook hits this pawn, pawn f5, and now this is where Hans Niemann makes a very strange decision. Very surprising. So the position is level, it's just zeros. There are multiple moves to keep it that way. But the thing to understand here is you can't let the king come to f4, invade the position and start attacking these pawns, in particular the g2 pawn. So what Hans should do is take on f5. After pawn recaptures, then there's two good moves here. One is rook to a4, cutting the king, very easy to understand. The other is g3, also stopping the king invasion, and I'll leave the line there. I know this rook can start attacking pawns, but this rook can start counter-checking and so on, so should be a draw. So this was the way to go. But Hans, instead, he plays this check, and the computer says, no, this is a bad move. Why? Because the king's marching in, as previously mentioned. Now when Hans captures, pawn recaptures, he gives a check, but the problem is the king is now coming into the position. You also could have gone to g3 there. So the rook came to a5, hitting back at those pawns, but now can you see how black should play here to progress the position and have a winning endgame? So the move to play here is pawn to g4. Now when Hans captures this one, which we see in the game, then g3 is the follow-up. This is the trick. You're using this f-pawn as a shield, and the king is going to march in and gobble the g-pawn. So we see f4 played, the king comes, and Hans is just completely paralysed here. His own pawn is just way too slow. There are different ways to win this, but rook d5 is a nice one. You pin the pawn, you're preparing to take the rook. So the king starts harassing this one, it moves away, the king comes in, and now this king just blocks off the other one, shoulders it away, and this pawn is running through. So king d4 played, pawn g2, king c4, and after check, we now had a resignation from Hans Niemann. Why? Because wherever the king goes, well, here's one sample way to win. You can bring the rook behind the pawn, preparing to queen, and obviously if you capture, well, this one's just way too fast, completely won for black. Strange decision from Hans Niemann, and if he wants to break that 2700 club, he's really going to have to brush up in some of these endgame positions. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to see the latest in the chess cheating update, then check out the video at the top of the screen, or if you want to see another fascinating Hans Niemann game, then check out the video at the bottom. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.